My name is Alan Rosen. I'm 68 years old. I want to tell you something that took me an embarrassingly long time to admit. We spend our whole working lives chasing a very specific target. We obsess over the savings account. We calculate what a fixed income is going to look like. We build a budget that stretches out for 30 years. We convince ourselves that once we hit that magic number, everything just clicks into place. I hit my number a while ago. I built a business that allowed me to step away entirely. I didn't have to worry about the grocery bill. I didn't have to worry about the mortgage. When you have Medicare sorted out and the house is paid off, you assume the anxiety leaves the building. It doesn't. And what I found on the other side of that finish line wasn't relief. It was a very specific kind of quiet that felt incredibly heavy. Any financial planner would look at our situation and say we won the game. They probably would have been right. But here's the thing. Having the money doesn't solve the Tuesday morning problem. It just means you can afford to sit in a nicer chair while you try to figure out what to do with yourself. And nobody's being honest about what that actually looks like. I thought the money was the entire point. I really did. I was very confident about that. I was also very wrong. It turns out building the wealth was the easy part. Living with the quiet that comes after is where the actual work begins. The fear isn't about running out of money. The fear is getting exactly what you wanted and realizing it feels empty. You wake up on a random Thursday and there is absolutely nothing urgent on the calendar. No deals to close, no fires to put out, no one waiting for your final decision. And that feels completely hollow. Not good weird, just weird. You look at the portfolio and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The dividends are paying out. The accounts are secure. But you feel entirely useless. I spent my whole adult life driving at top speed. I measured my worth by how many problems I could solve before dinner. When I finally parked the car, the engine just kept revving. I didn't know how to turn it off. I didn't know how to just be a person sitting in a room. And the worst part is, you feel entirely ungrateful for complaining about it. You feel like you don't have the right to say it's hard when your bills are paid. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system. I don't give advice. I'm not anyone's financial advisor. I'm just a guy who made a lot of mistakes and a few good decisions and lived long enough to tell the difference. I'm just going to tell you what happened and what we figured out. Because the transition is harder than the accumulation. It really is. The math is straightforward. The psychology of stepping away is an entirely different animal. I remember sitting at a terrible kitchen table in a rented apartment, looking at a stack of bills I couldn't pay. I was 31 years old. I had lost everything I had. We were borrowing money just to make rent. I had worked odd jobs in my 20s. I sold things door to door for a while. I had a brief stint in what I still consider the worst partnership of my life. I had a wife who had every reason to leave, and she didn't. I sat there staring at a negative bank balance, trying to figure out how to tell Barbara we were completely broke. I thought that was the absolute bottom. And then I thought, okay, now what? That now what was the most useful thought I ever had. I built a business out of that hole. It took time. It took an unreasonable amount of effort. I operated across multiple states. It involved a lot of handshakes and a lot of travel. I chose the deal over the dinner more than once. Barbara will tell you. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I eventually set it up so it didn't need me. I thought that was the ultimate victory. Then I took a flight down to Florida. It was a long flight, fully paid for. I sat there in a comfortable seat, looking out the window, and I realized I had nothing urgent waiting on the other end. No deal, no call, no one needing me. I sat there for 6 hours, and I didn't know what to do with myself. That had never happened to me, not once in 30 years. I realized I was one of the most uncomfortable people on that flight. I told Barbara when I landed. She didn't even blink. She just looked at me and said, "Welcome to what I've been doing while you were gone." I think about that sentence a lot. So I want to go through 5 things I've noticed, things I wish someone had told me about the other side of the finish line, things that have absolutely nothing to do with the math and everything to do with the reality of waking up retired. The financial industry sells us a very specific picture. They show us sailboats and golf courses. They don't show us the quiet moments in the kitchen when you're trying to figure out your own worth. The first thing is that accumulating wealth uses a completely different set of muscles than spending it. You spend 40 years training yourself to save. You train yourself to build the pile higher. You sacrifice today so you can secure tomorrow. And then overnight, you are expected to just comfortably start pulling from it. We sat down with our accountant about a year in. He showed me the projections. He showed me the exact safe withdrawal rate. He pointed to a piece of paper and told me we could comfortably pull $12,000 a month every single month without touching the principal. The numbers were right there in black and white. It was logical. It was mathematically sound, and I hated it. I looked at that $12,000 and my chest tightened. My father used to say that a man who keeps his word is worth more than a man who has money. He never talked about finance, but you could see how he treated a dollar, like it had taken effort to get there, because it had. I realized sitting in that office that my entire identity was tied to generating revenue, not consuming it. Every time a bill was paid from the retirement accounts, it felt like a small failure. It felt like I was losing ground. I would check the balances 3 times a week. I would scrutinize credit card statements for no reason. It drove Barbara crazy. She finally asked me if staring at the screen was making the number go up faster. It wasn't. That's when I figured out that the brain doesn't just switch gears because you threw a retirement party. The survival instinct that kept you hungry when you were building doesn't retire when you do. It just turns into a low-grade anxiety about spending what you already earned. You have to actively retrain yourself to accept that the money is there to buy you time. And that is a very difficult unlearning process. It takes conscious effort to stop treating your savings like a scoreboard. The second thing is that the retirement number does absolutely nothing to buy you peace at home. Look, money doesn't save a marriage. It also doesn't ruin one. What it does is make everything louder. Every unresolved difference in how you spend your days is suddenly amplified because you are both there all the time. We were in the car about 6 months into this new phase. We were pulling out of my daughter Rachel's driveway. I had been pacing around her house for an hour, offering unsolicited advice about her landscaping. I was measuring the distance between her sprinkler heads. I was analyzing the slope of her driveway. Barbara was driving us home. She didn't look at me. She didn't take her eyes off the road. She just said, real quiet, "You don't actually want to be retired, do you?" And I said, yes. And I knew while I was saying it that I was lying. I was trying to manage my daughter's yard because I didn't have a business to manage anymore. I needed a problem to solve, and I was making her lawn the problem. Barbara knew it before I did. She usually does. Barbara has a way of saying one sentence that takes me a week to understand. That's when I figured out that building a life with someone while you're working is fundamentally different than living with someone when you're both retired. The space between you changes. You have to renegotiate the terms of your daily existence. We had to sit down and actually discuss who was in charge of what, now that the default structure of my career was gone. The portfolio size didn't help us navigate that conversation at all. It just meant we were arguing in a nicer kitchen. We had to learn how to be in the same house at 2 p.m. without driving each other insane. You have to figure out how to be a partner, not a manager. The third thing is that nobody outside your industry cares what you used to do. Your past accomplishments have an incredibly short shelf life. I spent 3 decades walking into rooms where people knew my name, they knew what I had built, they wanted my opinion. I had weight in those environments. And I didn't realize how much I relied on that weight until it evaporated. My son Daniel works in tech out on the West Coast. He does something with software. He tried to explain it once, and I just nodded. I went out to visit him, and we ended up at a dinner with a bunch of his friends. These were guys in their 30s, running tech companies. Someone asked me what I used to do. I gave them my usual answer. I told them I connected things. I told them we moved things across state lines. In my old circles, that commanded a certain respect. People understood the logistics involved. At this dinner, one of the kids just looked at me and said, "Oh, like drop shipping?" I had no idea what that meant. I spent the next 20 minutes trying to subtly explain the scale of the business I ran without sounding defensive. I failed completely. I was just Daniel's dad, talking too much about the past. I realized halfway through my own sentence that they were just being polite. They didn't care. That's when I figured out that your professional identity is rented. It isn't owned. When you hand back the keys, you hand back the relevance. You have to find a way to be okay with just being a guy standing in a room. And I'll be honest, I made my first real money at 38, which means I spent my 20s and most of my 30s being very confident and very wrong. I thought the respect was permanent. It's not. It's tied to the utility you provide. When the utility is gone, you have to find out what's left underneath it. You have to rebuild your ego from scratch. And you have to do it without the safety net of a title. I used to hand people a business card, and that card did the heavy lifting for me. It explained my value before I even opened my mouth. Now, I'm just a guy in a linen shirt trying to hold a conversation. It's humbling, it's necessary, but it's deeply humbling. The fourth thing is that removing the struggle removes the gravity that holds your day together. I walked away from the business voluntarily. I planned it for years. I set it up so the operations could run seamlessly without my daily input. I engineered my own obsolescence. And on the first Monday I had nowhere to be, I woke up at 6 in the morning anyway. I drank my coffee. I read the news. I walked around the house. By 9 o'clock, the quiet in the living room was deafening. So I called the office, just to check in. I asked a few vague questions about a vendor contract. They were polite. They answered my questions. They also clearly didn't need me on the phone. Hanging up that receiver was somehow the hardest phone call I ever made. I sat at my desk and realized I had roughly 10 hours to fill before dinner. I don't fully understand why, but humans seem to need a certain amount of friction to feel alive. When you accumulate enough wealth to eliminate the friction, you don't feel liberated. You feel untethered. You wake up and you have to invent a reason to matter that day. Barbara told me I spent 30 years building something to leave, and maybe I needed to figure out what I was building now. I didn't have an answer for her. I still don't have a complete one. I am actively trying to figure out what my days are supposed to mean when they aren't measured in revenue or deals closed. It is a very strange season of life. You have all the resources in the world and absolutely no instruction manual on how to apply them to your own soul. You try to buy hobbies, but hobbies don't replace purpose. I bought expensive golf clubs. I played 3 rounds. I hated every minute of it. I realized I didn't actually want to play golf. I just wanted somewhere to be at 8 in the morning. You have to find a new way to be useful, and nobody can do that for you. It's a solitary project. The fifth thing is that what you think you are leaving behind is rarely what they actually remember. We spend all this time focused on the estate. We structure the trusts. We sit in sterile offices making sure the assets transfer cleanly. We worry about taxes and legal protections. We think the number we pass down is the legacy. It isn't, not even close. I have a grandson named Eli. He's named partly after my late father. I took him fishing a few months ago. It wasn't an expensive trip. We just sat on a dock with a couple of cheap rods. He didn't ask me about the business. He didn't ask me how I built the portfolio. He wasn't impressed by the trust fund he doesn't even know exists yet. He asked me if I ever got scared when I was young. He wanted to know if I ever felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I told him the truth. I told him I felt like that most of the time. I told him about being broke at 31. I told him about the kitchen table and the negative bank account. He just nodded and went back to watching the water. He didn't need me to be a successful businessman. He needed me to be a human being who survived making mistakes. That's when I figured out that the financial inheritance is the least important thing you transfer to the next generation. The actual legacy is the emotional honesty. It's the resilience. It's giving them permission to be terrified and keep moving anyway. I built the wealth to protect my family, but the money doesn't protect them from life. It just changes the scenery. If I want my kids to understand what I stood for, I have to actually show them who I am when the business is stripped away. And that requires a level of vulnerability that no amount of money can buy. Trust me, I tried. I'm not going to tell you it all worked out perfectly. It hasn't. I built something that would run without me, and now it runs without me. Some days that's the best thing in the world. And some days it's like watching someone else drive your car. I thought I was fine. Barbara knew I wasn't. She usually does. The transition takes time. It takes patience. More patience than I naturally possess. But mostly we're figuring it out. We don't have it completely solved, but we're standing on solid ground. It's quieter than I expected, honestly, and I think that's worth saying. If any of this sounds like your situation, leave a comment. Tell me what happened when you finally stopped working. Specifically, what is the one problem you thought having enough money in the bank would permanently solve that it absolutely did not touch? The thing that surprised you the most when the dust settled. I read the comments, I really do. I find those honest stories more useful than you'd think. It reminds me that I'm not the only one trying to figure out how to navigate this strange, quiet phase of life. And if you're feeling a little untethered right now, just know that it's normal. You're not doing it wrong. All right, take care of yourselves.